Hi, this is Rob Pierce with worshipbasics.com. Welcome to my tutorial on fixing the attitude of the congregation. One of the toughest things about starting a contemporary service is dealing with the attitude of some members of the congregation. Members of traditional churches are usually pretty reluctant to change, and adding a contemporary service is a big one. These are the sort of complaints that you might hear. It's good enough for us, why not everyone else? We are compromising with the world. You are littering the sanctuary with equipment. And do you think you are more spiritual than us? These are common criticisms that members of traditional churches make when faced with a change of an added contemporary service. Let's look at them one at a time. First of all, it's good enough for us. Why shouldn't it be good enough for them? First, you can emphasize that styles of worship change over time. They've always changed over time. This change may be more gradual in some churches than others, but even the most traditional churches change over time. You could point out that church music would be nothing but Gregorian chant if change never happened in the church. Even our hymns are a change from the music of the early church. It would also be wise to point out that the new service is an intentional missionary effort. You must relate to your target audience to reach them effectively, and a few changes in instrumentation, music, and the order of worship will help you reach people that you wouldn't otherwise. Chances are that you'll be able to point out your church's enrollment is dropping and that your church is losing the younger generation. Any inconveniences that you face starting a contemporary service are worthwhile as long as it helps you to bring them back into the church. Some argue that using contemporary music in church is compromising with the world. It's helpful to point out to these people that changing the delivery of the message does not change the message itself. We should agree with them that the gospel of Jesus Christ should not be changed, but the way that we present it certainly can. When your pastor preaches a children's sermon, he limits his vocabulary and uses concrete examples to help them understand the theology involved. Using contemporary forms of worship is similar. It just makes the story of Christ's love for us easier to communicate to people who aren't used to more traditional styles of worship. It's the same thing with changes in instrumentation and rhythm. The message is still the same, it's just the packaging that is different. In 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23, Paul writes, "Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became a Jew to win Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings." So Paul met people where they were in order to share the gospel with them, and I really believe that we should do the same. Some members of the church may complain that you are littering the sanctuary with equipment, and the truth is, they may be right. We really need to be sensitive in this area. People will complain if you transform your sanctuary into something that looks more like a rock concert venue overnight. It's best to make changes gradually if you can do so. If your contemporary service is sharing the sanctuary with a traditional service, you have got to be as tactful and unobtrusive as possible. It's important to remember that it should look professional for the contemporary service too. If you have a rat's nest of audio cables going everywhere, it's going to be annoying to everybody, so please keep things neat. Older members of the church are sometimes perfectly justified when they complain about contemporary worship leaders trying to claim the higher ground on spirituality. Please beware of the attitude of true worship. It's impossible to gauge the spirituality of members of your congregation by watching them in a worship service. Contemporary ways of worshiping are not better or worse than traditional ones. They're just different. We are doing older faithful members of our church a real disservice when we give them the impression that we put a greater emphasis on worship in contemporary service. They can worship singing Just As I Am just as well as you can singing Here I Am to Worship. God is the one who judges hearts. You're better off leaving all judgments in His hands. A better approach is to emphasize the beauty in all forms of worship. The best argument that you can make for a contemporary service is to stress that your church is making an intentional effort to reach the unchurched in your area. Most churches support missions. Remind them that not all mission fields are abroad. The Great Commission begins at home. There are plenty of people in your community who need to hear the gospel. Instead of being hurt that some members of the congregation are complaining about the inconvenience a contemporary service is causing, acknowledge that you are causing an inconvenience and ask them if they are willing to tolerate it for the sake of reaching the unchurched. Remind your congregation that churches that are focused inward usually stagnate, and those who focus outward usually thrive. The dead in the Red Seas are good examples of this. In these pictures, the Dead Sea is the one on the left, and it's called the Dead Sea because it has no outlet, and it has an incredibly high salt content. The picture on the right is a picture of a coral reef in the Red Sea, which has both inlets and outlets. There's no stagnation here. It is a sea full of life. It's the same with the church. If we only focus on the needs of current members without making an attempt to reach others with the love of Jesus, stagnation is not going to be far behind. These are just a few ideas that may help you gain common ground with members of your congregation who aren't pleased with the idea of a contemporary service. Remember that patience and grace will get you much further than just complaining back when they complain at you. A house divided against itself can't stand. Do all in your power to create unity for the sake of spreading the gospel. Good luck, and God bless.